Welcome to our virtual press conference on the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021. I will be the moderator for today's event, and I'm joined by our esteemed panel members, Representative Chris Smith, Representative Karen Bass, and Mr. Kenneth Morris. They will start us off with remarks about the bill. Then we will read brief statements by survivor leaders who partnered with us in the shaping of this bill. Then representatives from 5 anti-trafficking NGOs will make special remarks. Then we will open it up to question and answer session, followed by closing remarks by Mr. Smith. As you know, virtual technology can pose some unique challenges. We thank you in advance for your patience for any delays during this event. Our staff behind the scenes are working hard to help make this event run smoothly. Please note that during this event, we will not be able to see you, the attendees, but we will be able to hear your questions during the Q&A session. It is my pleasure now to introduce Congressman Chris Smith, representing the 4th District of New Jersey. Many of you already know him for his tireless efforts advocating for human rights and authoring many landmark legislation, including the original TVPA of 2000. Mr. Smith.
Mary, thank you so very, very much, and good morning to all of you. Joined by Frederick Douglass's great-grandson, Ken Morris, a remarkable human rights champion and co-founder of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, or FDFI. Congressman Karen Bass and I of California are today introducing the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021. As part of the present-day abolitionist movement, Ken Morris and FDFI, quote, bring the guidance of history to the fight against modern forms of slavery, and they do it so extraordinarily well. We introduced this comprehensive anti-human trafficking legislation on this special day, September 3rd, to recognize, remember, and celebrate the anniversary of the self-emancipation of Frederick Douglass. On September 3rd, 1838, Frederick Douglass disguised himself as a sailor and traveled from Baltimore to New York and bravely and brilliantly led the fight to end slavery, Jim Crow laws, and to advance respect and equality. Frederick Douglass's life and mission are incomparable, and they inspire. Remembering his tenacity, today we combat the scourge of sex and labor trafficking, modern-day slavery, and rededicate ourselves to abolishing it. For the past several months, Ken Morris, Karen Bass, and I, with an extraordinary assist from our professional staff members, including Mary Vigel, Corey Holmes, Piero Tazzi, and Heather Zanone, and with inputs, insights, and best practices from many, many leaders and NGOs, including survivor leaders like Robert Lung and Bella Hanoki, have crafted a bipartisan piece of legislation to reauthorize and significantly strengthen America's whole of government effort, both domestically and internationally, to protect trafficking victims, prosecute the perpetrators of these heinous crimes, and prevent it to the best of our ability. Our bill reauthorizes successful programs created by legislation that I authored 2 years ago, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and subsequent reauthorizations, and enhances some of those programs. For example, the bill strengthens the elementary and secondary school prevention education grant that Karen Bass and I created in the Frederick Douglass Act of 2018. And thank you, Ken, because when we met in the office and we're working about text, that idea came from Ken Morris, and I want to thank him for that idea of training our young people to be situationally aware, to know what to look for, as well as their teachers and people, administrators, and the like, to prevent them and their friends from becoming trafficking victims. So that is in this bill, reauthorized, but it's also expanded, and maybe Ken will amplify on that a little bit. We will try in this legislation to focus on something that's happened, especially during the COVID problem, and that is the grooming and trafficking of children through linguistically accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed approaches and scalable programs that use proven and tested best practices while also training the trainers to sustain these important programs. The bill will also reauthorize and strengthen the International Megan's Law and strengthen it to track convicted sex offenders, to protect victims and witnesses during investigations, provide restitution to survivors, prevent unfair sentencing of youthful offenders who are victims of trafficking, and provide stricter sanctions for traffickers in Tier 3 countries. The bill also adds accountability for the U.S. federal and foreign governments, hotels, airlines, through anti-trafficking training and codes of conduct for their staff, transparency in anti-trafficking expenditures, and permanently incorporates the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking and highlights the delinquency of reporting by state child welfare agencies and the Department of Justice in reporting missing and abducted children at risk of being trafficked. And there's so much more. And we will provide you, the members of the press and all interested parties, a summary. Many of you already know it because you have contributed to create the content of this legislation. So it's I just can't say how happy I am to have Karen Bass and I. We're working together again as we do on so many other initiatives. Let me introduce Karen Bass, Congresswoman, chairwoman of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights. She's a representative of the 37th District in California, serving her 6th term. Congresswoman Bass serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and also on other committees, including the Judiciary Committee. She is active in working to craft sound criminal justice reform policies. She's been just walking point on the issue of children who are, don't have homes and are being helped through the state interventions, but very often get lost. And she actually did a bill on trafficking that passed the House for those children and became law. And I want to congratulate her on that. And of real significance, she is the former Speaker of the California State Assembly and the first ever African-American woman in the United States history to serve as a Speaker of any state legislature. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Representative Smith, for such a kind introduction. Let me just say, and I know that everybody on this call, and I certainly hope all the media that are here, are well aware of Representative Smith's incredible history fighting for human rights in so many different ways, fighting for justice globally as well as domestically. And I've had the honor of serving with him on this committee for more than 10 years. He is the original author of this bill at the beginning of the 21st century, fighting on behalf of trafficking victims internationally as well as domestically. And so I am very proud to work with him again on the reauthorization of the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021. And to have it on Frederick Douglass Emancipation Day makes it extra special and a source of pride for all of us. The bill focuses on domestic as well as international, and I have worked for many years on one specific sector, and that is the population in our country of children in the child welfare system, many of whom wind up trafficked. In my city in Los Angeles and many cities around the country, the average age of a girl that is trafficked is 12 years old. She either runs away from foster care or she's literally kidnapped out of a group home or a foster home. This is a common situation, and then turned out on the streets are trafficked over the internet. And the bill addresses this population. I think prior to this legislation, many people viewed trafficking, whether it was labor trafficking or sex trafficking, as an international problem, not something that happens here. It is actually widespread right here in our cities, on our streets. And so the bill has several provisions that address the domestic situation. One of the reasons why the girls, and it's boys sometimes as well, stay with their trafficker is because they have no place to go. So we rescue them, we provide services for them, and then we send them out to be trafficked again because they don't have housing. And so this bill addresses that by authorizing $35 million a year for housing assistance grants for victims of trafficking. The bill also provides resources for survivor employment and education program that includes wraparound social services, case management, life skills training, education, employment, and college scholarships. It is not enough just to rescue people. You have to be able to help them. You help them prevent the being trafficked again, because that is often what happens. We need to establish protection and confidentiality for survivors. There needs to be an investigation team that looks into forced labor. We need to have primary prevention research and access to mental health care for survivor studies. So we have providing a sense of Congress that healthcare professionals and social service providers receive training on identifying and responding to human trafficking and trauma to renew their licenses. Many times in our cities, girls, children are arrested for prostitution. But think about it for a minute. If you're below the age of consent, how could you prostitute? That is not prostitution. And so in Los Angeles County, for example, we never refer to a child as a prostitute. So one last provision of the bill I want to mention, it would create a new protection for child sex crime victims who commit acts of violence against their abusers by allowing judges to suspend or deviate from any portion of an otherwise required sentence. Lately, in the last year, there have been some very famous cases of girls who have served long sentences for freeing themselves and unfortunately had to resort to violence in order to free themselves from their violent pimps. So once again, I am very proud to stand alongside my colleague, Representative Chris Smith, and very proud to be with everybody here on this call. Thank you so much.
I want to thank my good friend and colleague for her kind remarks, but above all for her leadership. As I mentioned earlier, the foster care legislation did get signed into law, and you took the lead on that, and as well as on so many others. So thank you so much, Karen, and friendship and collaboration on this important issue, I think is helping to make some difference. So thank you so very much. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker. It's Kenneth Morris, Jr., who is the great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington, two of the most influential leaders in American history. Mr. Morris is the president of the Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, FDFI, in Rochester, New York-based public charity, whose mission is to build strong children and to end systems of exploitation and oppression. I would note parenthetically that I had invited Ken 2 years ago to Luxembourg for an OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to talk about his initiative on training the trainers in schools, secondary and elementary schools, but also to 57 members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. I'm the Special Representative on Trafficking. And frankly, you could have heard a pin drop when he spoke. They were all talking when I was talking. But when he spoke, they took notes, and it was one of the best well-attended, because the feedback was phenomenal, because everyone wants to know, how can we empower our children and our students to know and recognize and then fight against this terrible crime. So, Ken, thank you for your great leadership on that.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Smith. It's good to be back with you. And as you heard, my name is Ken Morris, and I am very proud to say that I'm the great-great-great-grandson of Frederick Douglass and the great-great-grandson of Booker T. Washington. As you heard, I'm president of Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives. We're an abolitionist and anti-racist organization with a mission to build strong children and to end systems of exploitation. I want to thank you, Representative Smith and Representative Bass, for inviting me to be here today. Now, this bill has been helping to shape the domestic and international anti-trafficking landscape since the year 2000. Our organization, Frederick Douglass Family Initiatives, began developing human trafficking prevention education programming in schools in 2008. In 2016, we partnered with Three Strands Global Foundation and Love Never Fails on the online prevention education training program called Protect. Protect's mission is to create a world free from human trafficking through trauma-informed prevention education for children, corporations, and communities. To date, Protect has trained more than 60,000 adults and approximately 500,000 children, and we have received more than 15,000 testimonials and stories on the platform. 2018 Frederick Douglass Act, and I'm somewhat partial to this title for the bill, has brought for the first time specific language and funding to primary prevention education programming. The 2021 Frederick Douglass Act continues to evolve with the input from anti-trafficking organizations and the legislative leadership of people like Mary Vigil in Representative Smith's office. Examples of evolution for me include being sure that we understand the role of racism as a risk factor for vulnerable children and adults, expanding prevention resources to parents and guardians, and helping survivors get their lives back on track. I have the great privilege of being descended from one of America's best-known abolitionists, but I didn't inherit an understanding of contemporary forms of slavery. And that's why our knowledge of these crimes and the institutional support to stop them must continue to expand. And this bill will do that. And it's fitting, as you heard, that we're announcing this legislation on September 3rd, as this is the day that Frederick Douglass escaped from his enslavement in Baltimore at the age of 20. And I thank you very much for inviting me to give some remarks.
Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Representative Smith, Representative Bass, and Mr. Ken Morris for your remarks. Very thoughtful and germane for today. It is now my privilege to read brief statements from a couple of survivor leaders that worked with us on this bill. They're unable to join us today. In fact, one is on a plane right now. Bella Hanuki is a member of the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking and couldn't be with us here today, but it's important to note her key contributions in helping us address this complex matter, particularly complex challenges experienced by survivors on their road to recovery and empowerment. She provided remarks for me to share today. I'll be speaking as Bella. I want to recognize and acknowledge the great efforts being made by members of the House, and especially Congressman Smith and his staff, on behalf of survivors of human trafficking. Your advocacy and support has not gone unnoticed. This bill addresses critical limitations that currently exist within the TVPA. I believe it presents innovative, promising, and best practice interventions that will help survivors to overcome the numerous and often complex challenges they frequently navigate through justice, human service, and other institutions on their paths to recovery and economic self-sufficiency. To my fellow survivors, come alone, come in pairs, come in groups, come in thousands. Elevate your voices nationally in your respective states and local communities. Our voices are being heard. Keep roaring, keep building bridges, keep innovating. We are in solidarity with you, Congressman Smith, Congressman Bass, and other members of the House to fight modern-day slavery. We will continue to stand together and fight to prevent future victimization and promote survivors' lasting prosperity. Judge Robert Lung is former chair of the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking and current member of the National Advisory Committee on the Sex Trafficking of Children and Youth in the United States. Judge Lung also played a key role in this legislation, providing thoughtful insights, suggestions, and critical review of the bill. And I will now be speaking as Judge Robert Lung. I love this cause, and I'm thrilled that Congressman Smith and Congresswoman Bass have taken up this mantle. I have been very impressed with the revisions, how trauma-informed, survivor-informed, and proactive this newest legislation is in its approach, provisions, and fundamental philosophy. Now it is my pleasure to introduce representatives from some of our partner organizations to provide brief remarks on this bill. First, we have Grammy-nominated recording artist who also needs to catch her plane shortly, Natalie Grant. And Ms. Grant, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you so much, and thank you, Representative Smith and Bass, on behalf of Hope for Justice. Thank you for everything you have done to aid the anti-trafficking cause over so many years. My name is Natalie Grant. I actually learned about this cause on a trip to India with Congresswoman Linda Smith, who's actually here today. Hi, Linda. That trip forever changed my life. I saw firsthand children for sale on the street. I say that that was the moment that my life was wrecked in the best possible way for this cause. That's why we support this bill. It reauthorizes existing successful programs and also goes further than ever to combat the magnitude of human trafficking, from online grooming of children through to forced labor exploitation. I'm actually here in the parking garage at an airport. Every single time I pass through an airport, I think about how many victims pass through airports regularly. And that's why I'm so grateful that that's also a part of this bill, as well as what's happening with motels and hotels. We're so grateful for all that is being done so that so many can find freedom. This bill places such an accountability on airlines and airports and provides funds to train the workers so that they can recognize and spot the signs of a trafficking victim. We are thrilled that this bill also establishes 2 new federal investigation teams focused on forced labor and that it strengthens enforcement on imports. The US government has identified 148 goods from 76 countries made by forced and child labor, and we know that it happens here too. These new sections and the whole bill will do so much to identify victims, keep them safe, and prevent trafficking from happening in the first place. I'm a mom to 3 young girls, and I am horrified that they're growing up in a world where not everybody is free, where people their age are being used for exploitation in the worst possible way. What does it say about us as a society, as humans, if we don't do everything possible to make sure that humans are not exploited? We celebrate and endorse the way it brings together federal and international governments, the business sector, faith organizations, providers, and survivors, as we believe that all of us must work together until all of us are free. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Grant, for your remarks and support for our legislation. I also want to note that Ms. Natalie Grant is also the co-founder for Hope for Justice, one of the NGOs that also partnered with us. Thank you, and have a safe flight on your way here, I believe, from Washington.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Nina de Jong, the Director of Public Policy for EGPAT USA.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, all. I am delighted to be here today in anticipation of this important legislation. As the Director of Public Policy at EGPAT USA, I would first like to applaud Congress members Chris Smith and Karen Bass for the introduction of the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021. This legislation would expand supportive programs for human trafficking victims across the country, allowing for greater access to urgently needed services they rightfully deserve. As the first organization in the US dedicated to addressing the commercial sexual exploitation of children, EGPAT USA has long worked closely with stakeholders in the private sector to increase awareness of these issues and prevention efforts through trainings and other resources. We are pleased to have worked with Congress on this year's reauthorization to ensure critical provisions related to reporting and tools for hotels were included. We thank Congress members Chris Smith and Karen Bass for their continued leadership in advancing legislation that seeks to support survivors of sex trafficking, and we are proud to endorse the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. de Jong, for your remarks and support for our legislation. Next, we have Congressman Linda Smith, founder and president of Shared Hope International.
You are muted.
Thank you. My apology. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me this morning. I absolutely love this bill because it has matured. The first bill was about the time I left Congress, and Congressman Smith was a champion even before it was a concept. And he has championed that for years. And Congresswoman Bass, you are amazing. So the two of you leading in a time where people don't want to talk about things that are difficult, to me is just an amazing thing. We would like to comment today as the Shared Hope Institute on this important day. You were doing some things that nobody would have thought of doing because they didn't even believe there was trafficking of American children back when we started. And even in 2011, the states were barely looking at their laws from a point of domestic trafficking, and it was called different things. So you have championed this during the most difficult time of the time that we have been as a movement, and I know a lot of you on this call, as we as a movement have been trying to deal with the application of justice. So there are some awesome things that you've done in this bill. First of all, you've dealt with the definitions. And the Institute leaders asked me if I would just commend you to begin with, that by consistently defining trafficking definitions the same for states, you're actually focusing on the biggest issue, because if they don't identify them, they identify them, as you said, Congresswoman Bass, as criminals. They end up in the criminal system identified as a prostitute, and 19 states still do that. People go, really? Yes, and they do it in the name of a lot of good reasons. But what other victim of a violent crime do we call a prostitute or deny justice? You're getting into the very deep issues that the Institute is working on. And we've moved right there 2 blocks from the White House to stress this. But you are the stalwarts on this legislation. It has so many things in it that we are happy to support, that most of them have been mentioned. But I think 23 years ago when I founded Shared Hope, and Congressman Smith was pounding the drum, trying to get members of office, the president's office, everyone to pay attention to this bill, that we have known that people would have to accept it in society around the world, but here in America. And what you're doing by the reauthorization is saying, hey, here we are, and we're not going away. And your long-term commitment has done that. So this bill is really amazing. We support it in its entirety from Shared Hope, and we at the Institute for Justice and Outreach, the Shared Hope Institute right there by you now. We want to be there and stay as your tool to you and your offices. So again, thank you. And we will let this go back to others that are going to comment on this great bill.
Thank you, Congresswoman Linda Smith, for your remarks on the Smith-Bass TVPA bill. Up next, we have Ms. Ashley Bryant, co-founder, CEO, and president of the Three Strands Global Foundation. Ms. Bryant.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you all on this special September 3rd day. Three Strands Global Foundation overwhelmingly supports this bill, so carefully crafted by Congressman Smith and Congresswoman Bass. For over a decade, we've worked directly with communities, schools, legislators, at-risk populations, and survivors to mobilize communities to combat human trafficking through prevention education and reintegration programs. We have seen firsthand the value of investing in human trafficking prevention and recovery. The Frederick Douglass Reauthorization Act not only incorporates the voices of nonprofits and thought leaders in anti-trafficking, but is inclusive of survivor and lived experience experts, an essential consideration. By mandating elementary and secondary prevention education, this bill ensures that our youth receive vital protective information. By engaging healthcare professionals and social service providers in training efforts, we will strengthen our communities, understanding the impact of these horrible abuses and how to prevent them. Additionally, this bill's approach exemplifies the trauma-informed wraparound care practiced in trafficking prevention by not only addressing education, but by improving social support systems. Leaders and advocates often discuss the injustice of the victim to prison pipeline. This bill will directly impact the future of many of our youth by preventing unfair sentencing of youthful offenders who have been trafficked and abused, while also including employment support and other support services aimed to create self-sufficiency, an often overlooked but key component to eradicating human trafficking. Frederick Douglass has said it is easier to build strong children than repair broken men, and I believe this bill invests in widespread prevention solutions that will truly impact our nation and protect individuals from human trafficking. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grant, for your remarks. And last but certainly not least is Mr. Lance Lemons, Director of Government Relations for the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking. Mr. Lemons.
Thank you so much, Mary. First of all, thank you, Representative Smith, Representative Bass, for your leadership on this issue and this bill. Thank you for inviting us. I especially want to thank the staff of both of your offices, Mary especially. You guys are the unsung warriors in this fight, and we really appreciate your work. I assure you of that. You brought together a diverse group of stakeholders, including the United States Institute Against Human Trafficking, to craft this legislation, which is crucial to protect our most vulnerable citizens from what we all refer to as the modern-day slave trade. We do know in the United States through our work that upwards of 1 million innocent American children or adults are systematically raped and abused for profit. And this reauthorization, this legislation has been and will continue to be, after it's passed, an important component in the fight, not only against domestic, but also against international human trafficking. As a law enforcement officer myself in Washington, D.C., and as a representative of the U.S. Institute Against Human Trafficking, we see the horrors of this crime every single day. And we are committed. I know everyone on this call, Representative Smith, Representative Bass, the staff, are all dedicated to helping eradicate sex trafficking in the United States. We also operate one of the only safe homes in the nation for young boys who've been victimized by traffickers. And this legislation will really help move that fight forward as well on behalf of those boys. This reauthorization is vital. We wholeheartedly endorse this legislation. We will work hard every single day with Representative Smith and Bass and your staff to get this bipartisan legislation across the finish line. This bill provides millions of additional dollars to combat sex and labor trafficking, provide critical trauma care for victims, raise awareness across the country, and empowers federal, state, local agencies, private companies, other non-governmental organizations such as ours to join in this fight. And we're excited to get started.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lemons.